All right, everyone, let's go ahead and get started. It's good to see you. This is Unit 3 of Becoming a Resilient Scientist, and our focus today is on self-advocacy and assertiveness. And in many ways, I view today as the pivot from learning some foundational skills that we will apply to Units 3, 4, and 5 and beyond. So from these foundational skills, to sort of key relationship management skills. We'll address some issues of self-management and all of this, but we're really focusing now on how do I navigate within the educational and research and workspace to have the best experience possible. And that starts really from knowing how to self-advocate and how to be assertive. So we'll spend a lot of time on that. I want to answer a few questions that came in by email over the last 2 weeks. One asking for some examples of mantras that are useful as people face difficulties. And somebody said, for example, my PI always implies that I should never make mistakes. They make me feel bad about making mistakes. I make myself feel bad about making mistakes. And, like what kind of mantra could apply to something like that? And, a really simple, we all make mistakes. Nobody's perfect. I know right now it feels really hard, but mistakes happen, right? Something simple like that, even as simple as we all make mistakes. Mistakes happen. Mistakes are growth opportunities. I know a lot when I face a setback, I start with, it is what it is. So I can't undo it now. It is what it is. So that's an example. Another thing that people raised a lot of questions about is, so sometimes I feel like an imposter and I feel like I don't fit in, and I tell myself a catastrophizing story about not really being good enough. And sometimes I think it's a story, and sometimes I wonder if it's not really true, and perhaps I need to think about something else. And that's a really valid question, especially because we all make changes in our career paths, but especially at early stages as we try things on. And I've been reflecting on that a lot. And one thing that I think is good to ask is to pause for a moment and say, so what's the evidence that I really don't belong here, right? Because sometimes when we ask that question, we realize, well, my committee has given me positive input. I've gone to meetings and done really well giving talks. I've gotten really excited about science. Okay, so there's some evidence to the contrary, right? Some evidence says, yes, I'm thriving. I do belong here. So that's one thing. What's the evidence? The second is that sometimes even if we, have evidence and say, well, yes, I belong here, maybe we don't want to, right? Maybe our interests have changed. And so rather than questioning the story, pause and say, I'm questioning things. I wonder why. Not addressing the story, but addressing why the story might be happening. And that might be sort of a way in. So that's another question I got actually from 3 different people, that I really worry sometimes the catastrophizing stories or the imposter fear stories are really telling me I should be looking somewhere else. The last thing that I want to address is the very loud refrain about how hard it is to find time to take good care of yourself, how hard it is to find time to come to the discussion groups, to do other things that we need to do to take good care of ourselves. And, we're going to talk about boundaries today, and I hope that this talk helps a little bit with that. I guess what I would say is we need to appreciate that if we don't take good care of ourselves, eventually we will be faced with bigger issues and harder things. And so we need to start thinking about it as a part of our scientific toolkit, not something we do on occasion, but something we do because we want to do well. So those were 3 interesting and important topics that came through in the emails. I invite you to keep emailing me with your thoughts. I am learning a lot and really enjoying. We always start at the same place, that our thoughts and our emotions and our behaviors are inextricably linked, right? And that we want to understand each of these domains, how they play together. And we've talked about behaviors before from the perspective of our well-being behaviors, what we do to take good care of ourselves. We've also talked about behaviors from the perspective that difficult stories and uncomfortable emotions can drive unhelpful behaviors like hiding or avoiding, procrastinating, a lot of things that often are unhelpful as we try to resolve issues. Today, we're going to talk about behaviors from a new perspective, from a place of, do we speak up or don't we speak up? Do we say yes? How do we set boundaries? So really from the perspective of self-advocacy and assertiveness. To start with a near universal truth, we all struggle at times to appropriately voice our wants, our needs, our concerns, our opinions. It is hard for all of us at times to imagine saying no to someone very important in our lives. Sometimes it's even hard to say no to people who aren't so important in our lives. And then related to Unit 4, a part of all of this in terms of these struggles is that even when we want feedback, it can be very hard to hear and respond appropriately to it. And we're going to tackle these two issues in Unit 3 and 4 sort of together a little bit. On top of the fact that there's just a near universal struggle to be assertive and take good care of our own needs, when you overlay onto that the fact that people have different communication styles, different views of conflict, different work styles, and power differentials like we have in research groups, all of that adds complication. It is hard to be assertive among equals, but when you put a hierarchy on it, it's even harder. So that means we all have to work pretty hard to develop these skills and to be very self-reflective around when we can find these skills, when we can't access them or find them, and why that might be. I want to start with two definitions: self-advocacy, which is the action of representing ourselves, our views, and our interests with the goal of meeting our needs, expressing our opinions. This is one type of advocacy. The other is advocating for others. This is stepping up, speaking up, and advocating for ourselves. The other important definition is assertiveness, and that's the ability to express our feelings and to assert our rights and needs. And here's a really important part: while respecting the feelings, rights, and needs of others. So it's not just a focus on me only. It is the ability to focus on me while still considering the community or the we, right? It's really the ability to find balance there, to step up and take care of ourselves, to voice our opinions, finding ways to also factor in other people's needs, hearing their opinions. You could also view assertiveness as the ability to use a direct, open, and honest communication to address situations that are important to you. And another element, and we will talk a lot about boundaries, is the ability to set appropriate boundaries that feel right given the context and the situation. And I want to stress that. I'm going to use those two words a lot. There is no one way of being assertive. There is no one way of setting boundaries. It depends on the context and the situation, who is involved, what else is going on, how the relationship is, etc. So I want to stress that the importance of those words. I want to give you another way of looking at this, a more a way that's by picture. There's what I need and want. And then there's what the other person needs and wants. Being assertive is the overlap of those two. I consider my needs while keeping in mind the needs of others. Being passive is just focused on the other person's needs. You ignore yours. And aggressive is when you focus exclusively on yours, and yours only. So respect and boundaries are key elements of assertive communication because it factors in the me and the we. right? I want to start with a discussion on boundaries, and that means starting with a definition. So simply put, a boundary is just a divide between two things. Personal boundaries are between you and others, and you can think of boundaries as your own personal limits. And there are lots of boundaries, from physical boundaries of, this is my personal space, please don't touch me. Mental and emotional boundaries. A student came to talk with me the other day saying it just feels very imbalanced. I work together with this group, and we are constantly focused on the needs of the other person. They're sharing a lot of really stressful things. I want to be helpful, but I'm being overwhelmed by their emotional upset and their stress and distress. So, right, there's a boundary about how much emotional and mental energy we take on for others. There are time and energy boundaries. Do I say yes to leading the journal club? My PI asked me to have a summer student and it doesn't feel like a good time for me. Do I say yes or no? And there are lots of material boundaries, whether we share something or not. I love cooking. I think I've shared that before. And 2 or 3 times I watch a lot of MasterChef. And 2 or 3 times somebody comes out of the pantry, right? They have 5 minutes to pick the ingredients and they forget a key ingredient and they notice somebody else has it, right? A boundary is, do I share that or not? So in the lab, you made a buffer, you put some time and energy into it. Somebody asked you last minute, right? Now, once, maybe you want to say yes, twice, yes, maybe it's all the time and you're starting to resent it. Boundaries would say, here's the conditions under which I could do this again. So lots of different types of boundaries. Essentially, setting boundaries help us avoid overwork and burnout, being and or feeling unsafe, taking on other people's emotions and thoughts, violating personal or professional ethics. Sometimes, we set a boundary around something because what's going on feels very uncomfortable to us, right? There's maybe a little bit of unkind behavior in our research group. It feels like it violates our personal ethics to participate in the gossip or the interactions that are going on. And so we set a boundary because of that. Sometimes setting boundaries help us avoid input that's incorrect or unwarranted. And I want you to hold on to that thought for next week or 2 weeks when we talk about feedback. So sometimes people give us feedback that's really helpful and useful. It still may be hard to hear, but it's helpful and useful. Sometimes people give us feedback that is incorrect, unkind, unwarranted, all kinds of things, right? When we set boundaries around hearing feedback, that can be a healthy thing. Can also be an ostrich thing that we're ignoring something we need to hear. And that's why we'll talk about it so much next week. But it is one type of boundary setting. And then finally, setting boundaries helps us do something we're not comfortable doing. There are so many benefits to setting boundaries, but the honest truth is that setting boundaries is tough. So one way we set boundaries is if we say, no, I can't do that. No, I won't participate in that, right? So I'll feel guilty if I say no. Or we say, well, it's my friend, it's my family, it's my boss, I can't say no. So what does that do? That leads us to agree and say yes, even when we don't want to do something. And what does that lead to? That leads to the fact that our own needs are not met. And over time, not always, sometimes we just let go of it, but often, eventually we feel resentful, we feel tired, we feel used, right? And that can really degrade the quality of a relationship. That can really degrade our ability to focus on other things, right? We're tired, we're burned out, we're resentful of the person. So when they have input for us, we don't hear it the same way. Or when they ask us for something else, the resentment has built up. So the thing about setting boundaries is that when we don't set them, it can lead to pretty serious issues. Now, generally, you can think about boundaries as something that you learned over time in childhood, from your families, from your cultures, from prior experiences. I'm sorry about that. You probably can hear the dog in the back. Hopefully he'll settle down. Some of what we learned might be helpful. Some of what we've learned in the past might be unhelpful. It's context specific, right? It depends what we learned. But I want you to keep in mind that you learned about boundaries even when you were unaware that's what you were learning about. Boundaries should be viewed as flexible and context specific. So depending on the person or people involved and the situation. In almost every interaction, there are two things: the relationship and the task. Getting what we need and want, and tending to the people involved, right? And so we should view boundaries as something we pause and consider based on the issue at hand or the task and the people involved or the relationship. Now, setting boundaries means believing we have rights. And I think in hierarchy, sometimes people don't believe they have rights, but everyone has rights. Within the workspace, to be safe, to be supported, to be seen, to be respected. You have rights. And I think it's important for us to all give thought to that. We have to know what our rights are. We have to embrace the fact that we have rights. I think one of the hard things about imposter fears, going back to the last unit, imposter fears and other cognitive distortions, is sometimes those stories make us believe we have no right. We don't have a right to say no. We don't have a right to certain things within the workplace. Lots of things get in the way of boundary setting. And one is a lack of self-awareness around the topic. So at the end, there's some journaling prompts about how you've set boundaries, what you've learned about boundaries. Cognitive distortions. If I say no, they'll never ask again. If I say no, they won't like me anymore. Right? If I say no, my committee won't approve me to defend. Right? I have to say yes. So cognitive distortions can get in the way. We talked last week about discomfort tolerance. For sure, a lack of discomfort tolerance gets in the way because saying no is uncomfortable in the moment. A lot of times we have to sit with the discomfort. We even have to accept that it might get worse in the moment. While I say no to my PI about this or offer other ideas, my discomfort is getting higher and higher. The thing is that when we set boundaries and have those conversations, it often then gets better. But temporarily, boy, do we have to be good at discomfort tolerance. Shame and feelings of less than make us believe we don't have the right to do that. And that is a really important thing to factor in. And our view of hierarchy is another. Now, a lot of this is self-awareness and changing slowly our way of handling situations. And hopefully we've started on that in the discussions, the last two units, and in the discussion groups. I really, again, will stress how important those discussion groups are, because that's where you get to dive deeper into the material. Now, the last one, a lack of assertiveness skills, is where we're going to do much of our work today. So I'm going to try to lay out some models for being more assertive. I'm also going to lay some groundwork for self-awareness, touch on some of these other things. So assertiveness is a learned skill, and it starts with self-awareness. 3 questions. How do I view hierarchy? How do I view conflict and difficult conversations? And where are my skills and where are my gaps around assertiveness? It starts there. Those are probably the first 3 questions to ask yourself. Assertiveness is built on a foundation of tending to our well-being, engaging in community, and using resources to thrive. I mean, those are the 3 things we've been talking about from the beginning about resilience, right? So we build assertiveness on the foundation of building resilience. To become assertive over time means we have to let go of unhelpful beliefs and replace them with more helpful ones. We have to unlearn unhelpful habits and behaviors and learn new ones. We have to develop discomfort tolerance and some other tolerances we might touch on a little bit. And we have to learn assertiveness skills. And here's Teo. So if he doesn't stop, I'll pop up in a minute. You'll see me walk, but I'll keep talking even while I walk. So I want to start by talking a little bit about self-awareness. And I'm going to go ahead and try to get some treats brought down. Sorry, everyone. So I want to start with a little bit of self-awareness, and I'm going to start with the work of Hazel Rose Marcus and Alana Connor. I think this is really, when I think about assertiveness, I appreciate how this is a great place to start. It's not enough, and we need to go deeper, and we're going to talk about communication styles both today and in 2 weeks, but this is a great place to start. And they say essentially, we walk through the world, all of our worlds, with this self-construct. We view ourselves within this world. And some of us tend to come at the world from an independent self-construct or a me view of the world. Some of us walk through the world more likely with the lens of an interdependent self or a we view. Now, one thing to point out is we're not one or the other, we are a mix, but there's one that's more likely to be out more often than not. A me view, we see ourselves as separate from others, and we are focused on our own needs, our desire to be heard, and our wants and goals. But if we come at the world through an interdependent self lens or a we lens, we first principle see ourselves as connected to others and responsible for the welfare of others. And our primary focus is supporting the group, holding on to tradition, respecting authority, taking care of others. And again, we are a mix. But many of us come first from one of these lenses over another. And to help a little bit, another way of looking at it, in this independent self system, we really see ourselves as separate and unique. Yes, there are many important people in our orbit who matter to us, but it's very easy for us to step back and say, wait a minute, I come first. If we look at the world usually through an interdependent self system, we see ourselves as very connected to these people in our orbit, even people not really very close in our orbit, right? But we still feel responsible for the group. And so it's much harder to say, wait a minute, let me think about what I need, because I'm constantly thinking about what others need. So a me view or a we view. Now, how this impacts communication is that if you generally see the world through an independent lens, you see your relationship with boss and colleagues as pretty equal or more equal and fluid. You're more likely to be assertive, and you're more likely to use a direct communication style. But if your go-to self-construct is an interdependent self-construct, you tend to view relationships in a hierarchical environment as unequal and fixed. Your willingness to be assertive is lower, and your style of communication tends to be more indirect. And I'm going to show you some examples of indirect and direct communication soon. Before I do that, though, I want to stress something really critical. It is really important to appreciate that there is no good or better self-construct. This is just a product of our cultures and communities, what we've seen and learned and heard in our families and cultures. There are critical elements of both of these, and ideally, as we understand this kind of material, what we want is to appreciate the benefits of both a we perspective and the benefits of a me perspective. Ideally, we would be able to calmly approach situations by saying, there's a me here and a we here. Let me consider both. So no one should look at this model and say one is better than the other. What we should do is look at this and appreciate the fact that this has a lot of influence on our ability to advocate for ourselves, to communicate directly. Okay, so I just really can't stress enough, no good or better here. They are both wonderful. They both have their time and place, and we want to tap into our ability to both advocate for ourselves and see the positions and needs of others. Now, I talked about direct and indirect communication. So going down a little deeper, I'm just going to give you an example. So you want to let your PI know you're going to be taking a 3-day weekend. Someone with a direct communication style would say something like, I want to let you know I'm going to be out this Friday for a 3-day weekend. In fact, aren't we coming up on, in some places, right, in the government for sure, and maybe some of your universities, a holiday, a 3-day weekend for Indigenous Peoples Day. So perfect timing to be discussing a 3-day holiday, right? It's just very clear and direct. I'm taking off. Indirect could be something like, I'm thinking of taking time off, or I've been working very hard lately, maybe some time off. Very indirect, right? Now, sometimes somebody says, sure, anytime. Sometimes your needs aren't met when you take an indirect approach, okay? So direct, indirect. Here's another one. Think about you as a mentor. You mentored a summer intern. That intern missed 2 deadlines for giving you a draft of their poster. And then they email and they ask to meet with you on Friday, but that time's not good for you. Direct, you would say very clearly, I'm sorry, that time's not good for me. Direct communication style also means that you find a kind way later to talk about what happened, to discuss the missed deadlines, right? That's a direct communication style. Now, an indirect communication style, you just sort of go, oh, geez, that's terrible time, but okay. Now, maybe you'll revisit what happened. Maybe you won't revisit what happened, right? That whole me, we lens, maybe you just say, my job is to mentor this person, so it's inconvenient, but I'm going to do it. So that's direct and indirect communication. A first principle in learning all of this material is knowing what your tendency is when it comes to communication. Uli put an access link for the poll in the chat, and we're going to go ahead and activate the poll. You can pick up your phone and shine your camera on the QR code, whatever is easiest for you. So which one do you use more frequently? And we'll just let the vote go on for a little bit. Now, some of you might be saying, well, it really depends on whether I'm at work or at home. And if that's the case, I want you to just go ahead and answer for within your educational or workspace for right now, but put sort of park time for you to journal a little bit about your views of hierarchy, right? Because if your style is very, very much driven by whether you're at work or not, it could be your view of hierarchy. It also could be, if you say it depends on the situation, there are other reasons, but at least park a pin to think of that later. Very, very often we see more people who say they use an indirect communication style. There's usually quite a number who say direct, and there's always some who say they're not sure. The beauty of this is you get to pay attention now moving forward. You can come and talk about it in the groups. You can talk about it with others. You can just be a little more attentive to how you make requests. How you engage with others. So that's a really important piece of work. For those of you who feel certain, oh, I use an indirect style, oh, I use a direct style, the thing for you to be paying attention to is how often does it work for you? And how often does it not work quite as well? I have a very direct communication style, and it works some of the time, but I've come to appreciate not all of the time. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's helpful to tap into a style that's not quite as easy for me to use, but can work effectively. So regardless of where you are in being certain, your style, or not being sure, you have a little bit of homework to pay attention to over the next week or two. Thank you, Uli. So that's the beginning. That's one way to think about communication. Now we can go deeper and look at various types of direct and indirect communication and talk about passive, aggressive, assertive, and passive aggressive, okay? And so if you think about it, a passive style is indirect. It's accepting or allowing what happens or what others do to just happen without an active response. So passive is that we essentially don't advocate for ourselves. We don't set boundaries. We don't use our assertiveness skills. We just let it happen. The flip side, all the way on the other extreme, is aggressive. That's direct, but that's pursuing our aims and our interests without care about the long-term consequences, without care for the others or for the relationship. And in the middle there, sort of the sweet spot, is assertive communication, also direct, and it is having or showing a confident and really clear, calm approach to meeting your needs. What we want over time is to find a way to communicate assertively, not aggressively. We also want a way to decide, when should I just be passive and let that go, right? Because sometimes there's a place for passive. Quite frankly, sometimes when safety is involved, I think there's also a place for somebody really stepping up very directly. And, maybe aggressive's not a good word for that, but still aggressively saying, stop, that's not okay, right? But for the most part, we are aiming for assertive. Now, there is another form of communication, passive aggressive. Always right now into the Q&A goes, that's the style somebody, my PI uses, my supervisor uses, that's the style. Always, how do I deal with that style? We won't talk so much about dealing with styles today, although we'll be laying the groundwork for that. Passive aggressive is a mix of direct and indirect. So it's when you indirectly pursue your aims, and you do that by saying one thing and doing another. Okay, so I think that it's important to understand passive aggressive. It's a little bit like being a giraffe in jackal clothing, for those of you who've heard the last two talks. All right, so 4 styles. And I see a question and comments there about gender and such that I will address in a moment. So we'll get to that in a little bit. So I just want to give a sense of what it looks and sounds like, right? So you and a colleague have a report due at the end of the week. You're super busy. You have another project. You're really busy. You meet with your colleague to go over the report. The two of you realize you have to redo some sections, but your colleague says, sorry, I can't. I have family visiting. Passive, you say nothing and agree to make the changes. Aggressive, you get angry and say you won't do it. Right? You remind them our PI is expecting this. You agreed to do this. This is really not okay. We really need to make this happen. Assertive, you take a deep breath and you share that you're really busy too. You might even acknowledge how exciting it is that they have family visiting. And then you say, we need to strategize about how we're going to get this work done so we can do it together. Right? That's assertive. And passive aggressive, you say, no worries, I'll make the changes. Then you email your PI. You say, we need to change the deadline. So-and-so didn't meet the deadline. They're not doing the work. We need to change the deadline. And you don't tell your partner about this in advance. That's passive aggressive. Now, one example doesn't always help. The honest truth is we all use all of these styles. It depends, again, on the people involved, our level of care for them, whether we're resentful because of things in the past. All kinds of issues influence what style we use. But just sort of ask yourself, what's the style you most tend to use? And this is a really helpful table here that I won't go over, just a little bit about what they look and sound like. Now, something very, very important to keep in mind is we have an idea for ourselves of whether we are being assertive or aggressive, whether we are being passive or not. Like, we have a view of ourselves and others have a view of us. And those views can be related to the fact that our self-view is off a little bit. It can be built on stereotypes, right? So women who are assertive are sometimes called aggressive. There are lots of cultural stereotypes around communication styles. It's easier to be assertive depending on your identities, right? So it's also, if people have an expectation that you've built up that you tend to be passive when you try to be assertive, they see it as, wow, suddenly this person has become aggressive. There's a lot of cultural baggage here. Okay. And a lot of it is related to identity. And so it's very, very important to remember that this is way more nuanced than just paying attention to posture or generally our tone of voice, etc. Sometimes I feel that I've completely misread an interaction. I think that I was calmly assertive and I got back, oh, wow, that was aggressive. Sometimes I say, well, maybe that was a gender thing. Sometimes, I'm short. A lot of you don't know that because you've seen me just on Zoom, but I'm pretty short. I actually should probably say I'm very short. Sometimes I think that even plays into it, right? They look at physical appearance and make a decision. There are comments made about angry Black women, right? Where we feel we have hit the nail on the head for being calmly assertive, but all of these cultural things, expectations of men and women, judgments that we make about people's identities, it all plays in. So it is far, far more nuanced than a simple table or this discussion. That said, we still have to learn how to meet our needs, at least when something is very, very important to us. So this starts by us asking ourselves, what holds us back from being assertive? And I bet there is more than this, but these are the things I've come up with and that people in classes before you have added to the list. So sometimes we don't believe we have the right to be assertive. If we have grown up in many interdependent lens cultures, we can take the message we have no right to focus on ourselves, right? If hierarchies have sent messages by really putting out consequences when we've been assertive before, we just took in the message that we have no right to be assertive. Sometimes it's because we're not sure of what we want or need. Like, we're not assertive because in the moment, we're not sure what we want. So somebody says, you can do this, can't you? And we're like, I don't know. Yeah, sure. We do it because we're afraid of displeasing others or of not being liked. We have such a human need to be liked. So it can be very, very hard to say, no, sorry, I can't do that, because we lack discomfort tolerance. Sometimes that's in general. Sometimes we do pretty well with discomfort tolerance, but with this certain person or around this certain topic, not so much. We can lack emotional regulation and get angry quickly. So we hold ourselves back because we don't want to go from 0 to 100 very quickly. I will reflect that I grew up in a household where anger had a lot of place. People felt very free to make it clear when they were angry. And so I've learned a style that doesn't see anger as much as many others do, right? And that can really get in my way, because now I realize that, and now I don't want to get angry. And so I think, oh, I want to say something. No, I don't. Yes, I do. And I'm in a pretty high position of power, so I can take a lot of risk in that regard. When you're a student in a hierarchical environment, that risk can be very, very difficult. Cognitive distortions lead us to tell ourselves stories that hold us back. Hierarchy adds to that, right? And I mean, I think that one of the things about the research culture is you have to be assertive and set boundaries to really meet your own needs. Yet we work in an environment that tells us that we shouldn't have boundaries, that we should just take on work and, work hard to satisfy people in the hierarchy. And so those are key things that can hold us back. It might be that we lack skills we need to effectively be assertive. And it might be that we have some identities that come with stereotypes where being assertive can feel dangerous or something to worry about. I think there are many more than this. Let's pause for a moment and really take a look at these and think about the ones that are big for us, the ones that tend to hold us back. All right, and Uli's going to go ahead and activate a poll, and then we'll go ahead and see what everybody thinks. And you can pick as many as you would like. And usually over time, as the poll goes on, we see more and more things come into play, more and more people checking multiple boxes. I actually think a whole lot of things hold us back from being assertive. I haven't read all of the comments in the chat, and I actually just decided to close it to focus a little bit more on the lecture, but I can tell that people have had experiences where they tried to be assertive and it didn't work well, and now it makes it really, really hard to be assertive. So that's another one to add to the list, right? That I've had bad experiences in the past. So that's what we call an assumed constraint, because something didn't go well before, we assume it won't go well. So there are many more than this, but I think that these are really, this is a pretty comprehensive list. By far, afraid of displeasing others or of not being liked is at the top. Often struggle in situations that involve hierarchy is right below. I've seen this poll a lot of times. These are, things that we all struggle with. The interesting thing about it is all of us can have stories where this went really poorly, right? Where we wanted to be assertive, we tried to be assertive, it didn't go well. Sometimes we handled it beautifully, but the other person, right? We were assertive, so they just became more aggressive. So we tried to be assertive and it, so we walk away and we say that was terrible. All of us have struggled with this. It doesn't always go well. That said, if we want to have a satisfying career, if we want to get our needs met, this is a skill we need to learn. The flip side is we need to learn to appreciate, even when we do a beautiful job, it doesn't always work out. I notice here that lacking skills to be effectively assertive is pretty high up on the list, and we'll talk a lot about that today, and maybe that will really help. I also know cognitive distortions hold me back is high up on the list, and I hope in the discussion groups you can work to tie the material from Unit 2 with the material from Unit 3. The idea is not, thank you, Uli, the idea is not that 2-hour lecture and an hour discussion is going to like magically change your assertiveness skills. I wish it would. And, if it was, I would package this and sell it for a whole lot of money. Let's be honest. It's not going to change things. What it does is gives you small entrees to try to make change. And as you make small changes over time, they add up to bigger changes. And one day you find yourself with a whole new skill set. So holding on to what's hard about it, let's think a little bit about moving forward. The first thing we need to do is think about the stress around this. So some of the stress around being assertive comes from concerns about personal safety and educational safety. Some of it comes from cognitive distortions, especially catastrophizing, mind reading, and fortune telling. If I say no, then X will happen. Usually in a catastrophizing way. So our cognitive distortions come into play. Therefore, we need to get really good at weighing the risks and rewards of being assertive. And I'm going to give you a model for that, which I like to call a risk-reward scaffold. And so hold on to that idea of weighing the risks and the rewards. To do this, we need an assertiveness toolkit. So I would call an assertiveness toolkit a set of skills to help us decide whether or not and how to address an issue. The toolkit also includes some communication strategies that we need to execute our strategy well. And the other thing that we need in our assertiveness toolkit is a foundation of well-being and stress management. So 3 things: models for how to decide what we're going to do, strategies for doing it well, and a foundation of well-being so that we appreciate what we control, what we don't control. We hold on to that discomfort and work with it anyway. So I want to talk about 4 tools. And the first doesn't have a slide. We'll just do it very quickly. And that is a me-we assessment. So I think that one of the things that's very, very hard is we all come at the world with our self-construct, the me or the we, and we often ignore the other. To really make good decisions about assertiveness, we want to pause, we want to slow down. If we start with, here's what I need, we want to pause and say, okay, let me look at this from the other perspective so that I make a really good, calm, clear ask. And I don't trample someone else's boundaries and someone else's needs in meeting my own. If, on the other hand, we come at everything from a we construct, right, where we're worried about others, we want to say, okay, that's great. That's a really important element of who I am. And I want to, for a moment, pull out my me construct and think, what about me? Let me put aside the we. So a me-we assessment is really just a way to pause and remember that we need to consider both. The next 3, I have some slides on, and we're going to talk for a moment about journaling for decision making. One of my most favorite types of journaling is journaling for decision making. In fact, right now in my career, it's probably the type of journaling I do the most of. There was a time when I did a lot of journaling around leadership and management, and there was a time when I did a lot of journaling around resilience and some things happening in my life and family. Right now, I do a lot of journaling for decision making. And I just have a whole set of questions. And here are a bunch. You might have some that you like even better. What's the issue I hope to address? What are the barriers? That gives me a chance to think, so why would the other person say no, right? Or why wouldn't we be able to do this? Now, there are 2 kinds of barriers. One type are actual barriers. They are true barriers. And a lot of my journaling for decision making, an actual barrier is money or staff or time, right? Those can be actual barriers, but there are also imagined barriers. And I just had a great example of this. An imagined barrier is an assumption we make. So we're doing some work around building databases, and the contractor said, well, couldn't you modify this system to make it easier? I said, oh, nobody's going to modify that system for us. That's an imagined barrier because I didn't check. I didn't ask, right? So there are 2 kinds of barriers. And it's really helpful for us to ask ourselves, real or imagined? Sometimes there are multiple options available. I start, there's only 2, and then I think, oh, wait, there are some ways to expand on these options. So that's a good reason for journaling. I think it's important at times to think of the best outcome, the worst outcome, and some middle outcomes. I'll give an example from NIH. I talked with a postdoc who wanted some time to do some volunteer work outside of the research group and in an office to develop some skills for their long-term career development. Well, the best possible outcome is their PI says, sure, go, no problem. Take all the time you need. 3 months, no problem. The worst possible outcome is no, absolutely not. The middle outcome is shorter time, fewer days, some half days. Yes, but you come back to teach somebody, or yes, but you come back when the reviews come back, right? So you work to expand the options. Sometimes we need to ask some questions to make a good decision, right? Somebody asks us to do something and we can't really decide whether to say yes or no unless we ask some questions. So what are those? And that's a lot of this is a lot of me here, right? So here's a little bit of we. What do I think the other party's perspective is? So here I'm doing a little bit of mind reading, but controlled mind reading, because I know it's mind reading. And I'm going to use my interaction with them later to really learn what they're thinking. The thing is, if we prepare a little bit, if we use our mind reading, which I acknowledge is a cognitive distortion that can get in the way, if we use it in a helpful way, right, it can help us prepare for a conversation, right? So what's the other party's perspective? What do I think now? What do I want to learn from them? And again, a little bit of are there things I can offer to mitigate the concerns and address the needs of the other party? And I'll go back to that example of I'd really love a little bit of time to work in another office. After preparing and working on this, the postdoc offered a whole lot of ideas. I can stay until the paper is submitted. I'm happy to come back. Here are some things I've thought about. I can be available. I can still come to lab meeting. There were some things offered. Some things were like the first offer. Some things were like, oh, I hope I don't have to do this. But taking the time to journal slows everything down. Plus, it sort of is an answer to the, oh, I could never ask, because you're preparing to ask, you're journaling. And suddenly that, oh, I could never ask might become, well, maybe I'm going to try. And now I'm really ready. Sometimes journaling for decision-making leads to a conclusion of, I really need to have this conversation. But I realize that I'm very afraid. I don't feel safe, right? And I talk to trainees a lot who say, yes, that I need to have this conversation. I just don't believe I can do it because of the specifics of the situation. So 3 more questions. Who can help me prepare? Who can give me realistic and knowledgeable advice? And who can add to my safety? Right? Sometimes an institutional official needs to know what's going on because they can help. They can add to safety. So there are a few things that need to be added when you realize that fear keeps coming into the room. All right, so that's journaling for decision making. Now I want to talk about risk-reward scaffolds. This is another structured approach to explore risks and rewards. So I'm just going to, rather than talk about this, give you an example. So the example is that there's just a whole lot going on at home. It's affecting my stress level. It's affecting my sleep. It's affecting my ability to pay attention. And that is affecting the quality and quantity of my work. And so the decision is, do I want to advocate for myself and make it clear what's going on and that I need a little bit of understanding and a little bit of boundaries around work right now? Do I talk to my PI or not? And then, assuming I decide to talk to my PI, how much information do I want to share, right? What do I exactly want to share? So one thing you could do is journal, and that's really helpful. Another thing you could do is start this little scaffold: share, address, don't share, don't address, and you fill in the risks and the rewards for all 4. The beauty of this is I let my imagination run wild. I will put in every risk that I can see, no matter how outrageous the risk is, right? No matter, I mean, I told you my favorite cognitive distortion is catastrophizing. So I can see risk pretty easily. The beautiful thing is I can then pause and say, so which of these are ridiculous, and cross them off. So here's a risk reward scaffold. I've had this conversation with many, many trainees, and this actually represents the work of a few of them in deciding whether to share or not. So some risks: it's really embarrassing. Another risk is I just was vulnerable and nothing changed, right? Another risk is they say or do something that makes me feel even worse. Another risk is my PI changes my assignment. I didn't ask for that. I just wanted a little bit of extra time or space, and it's really disappointing. There are some real risks. Put them down on paper. Some rewards: I get support. Maybe they actually offer resources and ideas I didn't have. My stress level decreased because I shared it. It feels good to be honest. My PI has correct information, which in and of itself can be helpful in the long term. And maybe something big changes for the better. So there are the risks and rewards of sharing. Now, the flip side is don't share, do the exact same thing. So a risk of not sharing is my PI makes incorrect assumptions. Remember, right? People see behaviors and tell stories about the behaviors. So my PI makes a bunch of incorrect assumptions. There's the potential for bad will if they find out later. Why didn't you tell me? I would have helped, right? And then maybe they make some decisions based on faulty assumptions, right? You seem distracted. They get an email about a review. Oh, so-and-so could never do that. They just seem so distracted right now. So there are some risks of not sharing. There are some potential rewards for not sharing, right? You avoid the discomfort of sharing. You avoid all of the emotional upset of sharing. Maybe you feel more independent. A lot of times people don't share. It's like, oh, I'm going to solve this on my own, right? That feeling of independence, right? That can be a reward. If you have a really difficult PI, right? A PI that has shown you before that they're not very supportive, the reward of not sharing is safety from that conversation and from them, right? In some ways. So each and every time you do this, it depends on the context. And the beauty is that you can do it within the exact context, the exact people, the exact opportunity. That is the beauty of this. A lot of times after you do this, you have to sit and modify, cross off. Maybe then you want to journal about 1 or 2 points. Maybe you want to take this and chat with someone you really trust about it, right? Maybe you want to sleep on it at night and go back to it the next day. But this is a great beginning for making a hard decision. Now, I want to do one around saying yes or no to an opportunity, because I want to make one more point as we talk about risk-reward scaffolds. So here's one where your PI asks you to help organize a research retreat. It's really exciting. It's even an honor. You can't believe they asked, but the honest truth is it's a bad time. You're writing paper. It's just not the best use maybe of your time. And you need to decide, do I say yes or do I say no, right? So the other thing you need to decide is, in the long term, how do you address it? But I'm going to let that go for now. I want to give you one more journaling set of prompts, is deciding whether to say no or not, right? So here are some questions to help you decide about saying yes and no to things people ask you, right? And this one's one of my favorite. Will it matter in a week, month, year? Some things won't even matter the next day, and we still agonize over them. Is the request from someone I care about, right? What else is going on? So there's a whole lot of questions here. So that's one thing. But the other thing is the risk-reward scaffold. These two things together give you one more tool in your toolkit. So here I outline some risks and some rewards to saying yes and saying no. Okay, and some of the, some of them relate to how your PI views you, like my PI is happy with me. Some of them might relate to you and how you're feeling, right? The risk is I'm overwhelmed and this could be the tipping point. So there's some me in this and there's some we in this. There's some task. Do I say yes or no? There's some relationship. It's my PI. This is important. What do I do? The key of each of the things in the box doesn't matter. It's this that matters. This additional question in the risk-reward scaffold. What can be done to turn my no to yes? What could be done, to turn my yes to no? Like, what in the context, what in the situation might require discussion, right? So you might do all of this and go to your PI and be really transparent and say, I think this is a great opportunity. I could learn a lot. It's not the best time. Can we talk about it? And I just had an example of that. I forwarded an opportunity to someone in my office, and the response was, seems like a great opportunity, but boy, that's a bad month, right? That's what can be done to turn my no to yes. Now, maybe we're going to stick with no, but maybe we're going to meet and we're going to explore options. This, of course, requires an assertive conversation, right? We can't go and move beyond these risk reward scaffolds to have conversations until we have also considered our assertiveness skills. So I really like these things because they take something that's pretty emotional and they let us sit with the emotion a little bit. They also let us acknowledge the emotion, but it brings some of our cognitive processes into play. It lets us make decisions based both on our thoughts and our feelings, and it allows us to double check that our thoughts aren't distorted, right? And so I really like it. Play around with it. We will get a handbook. They're going to be late the whole time. I apologize for that. That's on me, not anyone else. I got started a little bit on that project of pulling together new handbooks a little bit late. But we will have a lot of material on risk reward scaffolds on the handbook when you get it. A few things to have an assertive conversation. We need to believe in ourselves. We need to have strategies for grounding ourselves and staying calm in the moment. And we need to have some assertive communication skills. 3 things, right? So belief in ourselves, sort of the cognitive piece of we have rights. We have we are able to do this because we have certain rights. The second thing, the strategies for grounding ourselves, controlling the racing thoughts, the uncomfortable feelings. This comes, a lot of grounding is really deep breaths, pausing, mantras, imagery, things we've talked about some already, and communication, assertive communication skills. I happen to love this book, Your Perfect Right. There are other good books on assertive communication. Some of you might have other ones you like, but I wanted to put out there that resource. I'm going to talk about a couple of skills that we need to develop over time. One is empathic listening. And that's where we periodically summarize what we think the other person or the communicator thinks, feels, means, and needs. We don't have to agree. In fact, if we have different positions, we're not going to agree, but we are still showing that we're hearing, summarizing, right? But we're not agreeing. It also means that we ask some clarifying questions that help lead to a solution. So I wanted to give you an example. A colleague, a friend is disappointed. Twice you weren't available for coffee chats that they invited you to. Twice in the last week, they said, hey, can we get together? And you said no. You want to be a good friend, but you have work due. A lot is happening at home. And right now you need to set some strong boundaries. Your committee meeting is coming up. Your PI is waiting for your report. And you want to be a good friend, but now's not a good time. So you need to set a boundary. Empathic listening would be, I hear that you're disappointed that I didn't make time to get together last week. If I understand, right, you're not saying, oh, I got you. You're making clear you understood. If I understand, you feel I let you down, and you really need a friend right now. And maybe they say, you didn't let me down, I understand, but I really do need a friend. Can we talk about it so I can be a good friend and take care of my work deadlines? That's an example of empathic listening, right? You verified understanding. You asked clarifying questions. I statements. I statements are when we take responsibility for our own feelings, our own wants, and our own needs, and we express them clearly. Very, very often when I am working with students, when I talk in groups, we come to issues around microaggressions. When we talk about imposter fears, when we talk about the difficult stories we tell, very, very often they come from the fact that other people dump unwelcoming stories on us, often in the form of microaggressions. I think that one of the key issues that we have in our community is all of us becoming more aware of our microaggressions, all of us learning to check them, to let go of language that we use that is indirectly unwelcoming. And so a lot of this, I think, rests with us to understand our use of microaggressions, but there is an issue of being an ally and stepping up. So a really nice example of I statements is around microaggressions. I feel, and you can fill in the blank, I can't tell anybody how to feel, right? I feel hurt, angry, disrespected, unwelcome when I hear comments about, or when you make jokes about. I think the nice thing about I hear comments about is you're not attacking the other person. And sometimes we can get farther with our assertiveness when we avoid anything that seems like an attack. And here's even a more example of owning what we want. I would like for you to stop making these comments. Now, sometimes you want to be an ally for someone else. I feel that some of our colleagues feel hurt, angry, disrespected, unwelcome when they hear comments like, I would like for you to stop, or I am asking for you to stop. Now, of course, again, no one model will work for every situation, and something might feel like it needs a stronger response. You might not feel safe in the moment, so you choose not to say anything and you want to get advice later and talk to somebody about it later. But I think it's important to think about the strategies that we use when we hear things that we believe are microaggressions and not appropriate or supportive. Another one. You're working on a group project, a team member isn't responding to you with comments about the presentation. This has happened more than once. Your resentment is building, right? And you could say nothing and just work on it alone, and your resentment could build some more. Or you could try some assertive communication. I feel frustrated. I feel fill in the blanks, right? I feel let down. I feel like I'm alone in this when I'm working on a project and my emails aren't responded to. I would appreciate if you can make this a priority and give me a sense of when I can expect to hear from you with your input. Now, this between two colleagues working on a project might be really easy. This you sending to your PI, I'm waiting on feedback on my abstract, right? This may not feel quite as easy. So again, context matters, the people matter. You might want to modify depending on all of that. But I just wanted to give some examples of I statements. They are some of the most important elements of assertive communication. Two other strategies, negative and positive inquiry. This is using questions to probe the meaning of feedback when you want or need more information. And we're going to talk about feedback next week, but it's such a big part of assertive communication. And so I thought I would include it here anyway. So positive inquiry is you get feedback 2 weeks into your rotation or 2 weeks, or right after a practice seminar. Oh, that was great. Like really not so helpful, not enough depth at all. And in fact, a postback here at NIH came to talk to me this week and said, all I'm getting is you're doing fine. And this is really holding me back because I'm telling myself a story that I'm not doing enough, right? And they're just saying you're doing fine. So positive inquiry would be thanks. I appreciate that positive input. I'm glad you think I'm doing fine, or I'm glad you liked my talk. Positive inquiry would be going one step farther. Would you mind talking to me in a bit more detail so I can learn from the experience? About the presentation, maybe what did you think about the introduction? About the, hey, you're doing fine in your rotation? What especially, do you think is going well? Now, the flip side is negative inquiry. And people talk about that from the perspective of, so you got negative feedback, right? You're not off to a very good start. You might not be cut out for this. Negative inquiry is then asking questions to get at a deeper meaning there, right? Oh, that's disappointing. I'm hoping to start a job search soon. I'm hoping to start my applications. I'm thinking of postdocs. I would really like to learn from the experience. What is it that you feel is lacking? That's big assertiveness. I think it's big assertiveness when people tell you you're doing fine to say, hey, what do you mean? I really want to learn from this. But it is even bigger assertiveness when you get more negative input to say, I'd really like to learn from it. So I think in some ways that is a skill that takes a lot to develop. But these are incredible assertiveness skills as we learn to use them we just continue to expand in our ability. Sometimes conversations get really complex, and there are two great approaches that we can use. One called fogging, where we calmly restate something without agreement. People really like to be heard, right? I understand, I understand that you feel a lot of pressure about getting this paper submitted, right? You're just you're restating it. I agree. I hear you, right? Well, not you agree. I hear you, right? Not I agree. I hear you. You really want to get this paper in as soon as possible. So do I, right? So that's fogging. You calmly restate without agreeing. Broken record is that you also calmly repeat your needs, right? Yes, I hear you. You want to get this paper in as soon as possible. So do I. And I still need to take vacation next week because, right? Because I have an important reunion, because I made plans, because it's when my family reunion is, right? Fogging and broken record. So those are two skills really as conversations get more complex. In some ways, the beginning of fogging is empathic listening, right? Fogging is when you are going back and forth multiple times. Now, there were some comments made, oh, when I'm assertive, other people start to get aggressive, and sometimes we have to match their increased energy a little bit. Sometimes we realize we're not safe, or the hierarchy doesn't allow it. So in the moment, we're not just going to pull all these tools out and use them. We are going to be able to ground ourselves and slowly, think it through. Slowly in the middle of a conversation, right, is not a lot of time, but we're going to need to develop the ability to, in the moment, make a decision. Do I go forward? Do I stop? Do I say another time? Do I try to reach an agreement? This is such an advanced set of skills, but we have to start somewhere, and then we continue to grow. It takes a lot of preparation and practice. It's really iterative. We do it, we learn from it, we do it again. It's best to start in safe places. It's not a good idea to decide, I'm going to suddenly practice assertiveness skills in a very high risk time with a very important person who I know, who I feel could be difficult. Or maybe you're not even sure that they could be difficult, but you've never tried before. You're uncertain. It's very high stakes. You might want to get support then. Time can be a great tool. Time to practice and prepare, pausing before responding in the moment, saying you'll think about it. Somebody asks you to join a committee, right? And you really feel like you need time to go do some journaling for decision making, do I say yes? Do I say no? Risk reward scaffold. So say, I want to really honor your ask, and I need some time, right? Can I get back to you tomorrow? Sometimes emotions start in a really good place, and then they get higher and higher and higher. Time is a great tool there. Hey, we all need to take a break and meet later. So that's another important thing to keep in mind. Time is a really great tool. The last of the three is you want to make a clear ask. A clear ask is when you're very specific about what you're asking for, both internally, what do I want, and in your communication. A lot of trainees will come and talk with me about needing more support and guidance and interaction with their PI. They'll say something like, they're really nice, I like them, but they're never available, and I just need more time, right? So a clear ask, right? If you just say, I feel I need more input from you, what does that mean? Do you want to meet with me? Should I answer your emails? What does that mean? When you give a talk, I should write comments on your PowerPoint. So a clear ask is, I would appreciate if we could schedule a weekly meeting. I would appreciate if we could meet on, at your convenience, but more often than we're meeting now. Clear ask. Sometimes a trainee will come and talk with me, and I notice this myself sometimes. I will, say that something's, I didn't get what I needed from my boss or from a colleague or from a committee that I'm on, right? I asked for something and I didn't get it. And sometimes to students, I'll say, well, what exactly did you ask? And we realize it wasn't a clear ask. And sometimes to myself, I realize I didn't make a clear ask. Remember, we talked at the start about indirect communication. Indirect communication leads to very unclear asks. You say something like, everything is so busy right now, when you really want help, when you really want to say, I wonder if I could have a little help with this project. So indirect communication leads to unclear asks. A couple of really important things that we're going to wrap up with a small unit. And the first is, you cannot make anyone do anything they do not want to do. And the only person's behavior you can control is yours. So you can do a bang up, amazing job at being assertive, advocating for yourself, making clear asks, and the other person could completely fail to hear you, completely disappoint you, dishonor you, etc. Right? Sometimes you do the very best you can, and the other person does not do the very best they can do. The thing is, the only person's behavior you control is yours. It is a win even when you don't get the outcome you had hoped for. Developing your assertiveness skills and using them is A, practice for the next time when it just might work. B, sometimes it is so good to own our space even when others don't respect it. The honest truth is that it is a win even when you don't get the outcome you had hoped for. The last of the 4 final points, before I do one more final point, I really should say 5 final points. It is impossible to eliminate all risk. The key question is, what are the risks? How high are the risks? What resources are available to help me prepare? And what resources are available if worst case scenarios come to pass? Very, very often when we talk about risks and rewards, or best outcome and worst outcome, one of the things you need when it comes to worst outcome is help making a reality check. Is that likely to happen? But also help if it does, who's here to support me? Fear is a big thing that holds us back from being assertive, because things didn't work out before, because of hierarchy, because of cognitive distortions, because the person shows us that we should be afraid for some reason. Fear is a big part of this decision making. And I just want to remind you of what we talked about when we were talking about emotional regulation, right? We want to be aware, right? I'm feeling fear right now. We want to assess it accurately. Rather than pushing it away and saying, I shouldn't be feeling that, right? We want to say, why am I feeling that? Rather than saying, I'm afraid, so I'm going to be quiet. We want to be able to pause and say, okay, I'm feeling fear right now, but does that mean I should be quiet? Maybe it means I need to talk to someone, right? So remember that as we're sensing this fear because of risk, we want to learn how to sit with it so that we can take appropriate action. Now, the 5th final point, and we are coming to the end, I think that when it comes to boundaries and when it comes to assertiveness, anger is often swirling around us. It's not always acknowledged, but the honest truth is there is real risk when we don't acknowledge anger. First of all, we risk, we're feeling angry, we ignore it, we stuff it down, and then we take that anger out on someone else, someone we love and care about, who had nothing to do with the situation. A couple weeks ago, I ended the day, a Friday. I was in such a bad space. I felt this so much pent up negative emotion. And I think there was a time in my career when I would have stuffed it down, and I think it would have ruined certainly Friday evening and possibly all the way into the weekend. And instead I said, I have got to go out and take a walk. I have to get rid of some energy. And for about the first 20 minutes, it didn't seem like it was helping. And then somehow something shifted. You know, it ended up being such a shift in the way I viewed the situation and my ability to have a really wonderful evening and weekend. When we ignore anger welling up in ourselves, it can get in the way. When we process it and do something with it, you know, it gives us a lot of chance to move forward in a positive way. The other thing is when we ignore anger in others, or when we allow anger in others to shut us down when it shouldn't. So I think anger is often at play. Anger can come up when we don't speak up and something really bothers us and it builds over time. Anger can come up when we speak up too soon and without preparation. And of course, anger can come up from the other party. And really, I think all of us need a lot more support and help with anger management. And we won't go into anger in depth today, but I do want to say a couple things about it. And one of the key things for me is to appreciate that frustration and irritation and anger are like a continuum. So we start out frustrated, you know, we're annoyed or upset, we can't change something, we can't get something we want. It leads to irritation, right? Which is a state of, you know, impatience and feeling slightly angry, and it can blow into full-blown anger. So we should view these emotions as a rheostat and as an early warning system. When we feel frustrated, we should be seeing that as a data point that we need to pause. We need to collect ourselves. We need to decide assertiveness now or not, avoid now or speak up later. It's really an early warning sign. Others may see things differently than we see things. Sometimes I say I'm not angry, I'm just frustrated, and it looks like anger to other people. And some of that goes back to some of the cultural issues that we brought up when we were talking about assertiveness, and that I hope we talk about in the groups next week. When we feel any of these three uncomfortable emotions, but important emotions, bringing key data to our attention, we are getting messages like, I'm being blocked from doing something I want to do. This isn't going the way I had planned. I didn't get the response I wanted. I'm not being understood. Sometimes it's really internal. I thought this would be easier. It would go smoother. It would have a different outcome. I thought I would feel differently about this, right? And then sometimes it's, I was wrong, disrespected, demeaned. These are big, important messages that require us to pause and to consider our assertiveness skills. When we don't develop our assertiveness skills, we are essentially inviting frustration, irritation, and anger into our lives, because when we can't assert for ourselves, we are always allowing others to decide for us, and that is really difficult. And eventually it does lead to resentment, anger, irritation, etc. I talked some about tolerance last week. I introduced the concept of tolerance, meaning we sit with something uncomfortable. We talked a lot about discomfort tolerance. Frustration tolerance is another one, right? And I think along with frustration tolerance is the idea of anger management. It's our ability to assess how we're feeling and decide in the moment, what does this message mean? Sometimes we feel frustrated with somebody, and the message is, as we think it through, that we need to let go. We need to go take a walk and get rid of some of the negative energy. But sometimes we need to sit with that frustration tolerance and realize that we're going to need to say something. So frustration tolerance and discomfort tolerance can then blend together. So much of our ability to use these skills is that emotional regulation, the ability to acknowledge those uncomfortable feelings, and decide accurately what to do next. I think it's important that we journal about what frustration looks and feels like to us. It's so important that we find ways to pause and regroup. That mantra of "it is what it is," that's why I use that. It allows me to pause for a moment and regroup. You need your mantra. Imagery can help. You know, I'll sometimes say, is it worth getting heated about? Would a break help? Is a really great one. Almost always my answer is yes. And it doesn't have to be a big break. sometimes I'm actually in the conversation and I just suggest that we take a moment. So these are skills that help us deal with our frustration, with the idea that as we manage our frustration, it's easier for us to then layer on the ability to manage anger and to sit with anger. Of all of the emotions we talked about, shame being really difficult, I would put anger in that category together with shame. For me, this assessment was really helpful and eye-opening. It helps you ask about your anger management. Now, I think it's also important for us to consider the anger management of people that we work with. And I have learned that for some people, space is really important. And that's hard for me to give sometimes in the moment. I like to talk things through, and some people just need space in the moment. We all want early warning signs into our triggers, our hot buttons, because assertiveness skills can lead into territories around anger a lot, right? Our needs aren't met, right? And suddenly our assertiveness skills are turning into more aggressive behavior. There's also issues of being on the other end, being on the receiving end of this. The other thing is that I feel like this assessment gives us a language for talking about this. It really helps us learn how to figure out assertiveness and boundaries. It helps us figure out what to do when others have a different perception than we do about it. And I think that it also helps with self-compassion. It makes us realize how hard this is. So at some point, do this assessment. I think it's also helpful to do it thinking from the perspective of people that you work with, right? What does your anger phenotype look like? What do you think their anger phenotype looks like? My hope is that you in a work environment where you don't see a lot of anger. The honest truth is, if we all focused more on relationship management and compassion for ourselves and others, if we all focused on resolving issues, there would be less anger directed at each other. There's anger that we have at things in the world, right? There are things to be angry about beyond interpersonal things in the group. So anger is never going to go away, but anger within the workplace at each other would go away more and more, I think, if we all thought some about our anger phenotypes. So I think that that's a really key thing that I've barely scratched the surface on. I think you could talk for 2 hours about anger, and you could have a group discussion, etc. Maybe it'll come up some in your discussions next week. These are some of the things in that anger assessment that I think are so interesting. But I want you to notice some things. There are things about, right, I can forgive when I'm angry. You know, do I take physical action? There are things specifically about anger. But here's a question. I have an activity, hobby, or routine I use to release my feelings of anger. What a key thing. That ties that first talk about well-being, right, all the way to assertiveness in a big and important way. So I wanted to just end with a little bit of fun. I know that's a hard topic. This is Teo, who you heard barking. He has a job in the house. We have some of the cleanest dishes in Silver Spring. This is Austin. He likes boxes. I don't have much else to say about Austin. He's such a great cat. So cats and dogs. Clear asks and assertiveness strategies, assess risks and rewards, take time to prepare, and soften distorted thinking. That's what Austin is leaving you with. And Teo, dogs, discomfort tolerance is key. Offer or ask for time as needed. Growth mindset, going back to the beginning. Assertiveness is a learned skill, and it's really hard. Anger management, negotiating across hierarchy when stakes are high, hard. Learn skills, but hard. And then finally, always a take-home message. Seek advice and support when the stakes are high. Hats, right? Seek support. And we've talked about this a lot. Rabbits, when we were talking about emotional regulation, the S is seek support, right? Seek advice. So always an important one. So cats and dogs, and specifically a message from Austin and Teo. We will have discussion groups next week. You know, the numbers are down. Not surprising. It happens every time. So I wasn't expecting anything to be different. But I have to say that if I could wave a magic wand and change one thing, it would be that you show up at the groups. I think that the culture of science needs to change, and a lot of that rests with PIs and leaders. But the honest truth is we all need to develop much better resilience skills, much better interpersonal skills, much more attentiveness to building relationships. And I think a part of it is getting together and talking about things like that. So I hope you join us. There are several journaling prompts, and please give me feedback. I actually do read them. I pay quite a lot of attention to the feedback. You can also email me. One of the feedback at the beginning was it would be so great to do this, to try to have one of these sessions in person. We will remain on Zoom for the small groups, but I think Uli and I are very, very hopeful that we will be able to do a hybrid presentation for Unit 4 and Unit 5. COVID cases here in Bethesda are low, and while we can't put tons of people into a room, we think that it would be really fun to try that. So I do pay attention to your feedback. Great. So with that, I am going to go ahead and take questions. There's somebody who says, I found out about this in the middle. Can I be added to the discussion groups? Yes, you will get an email right after with a link to joining the discussion groups. You might most certainly can come in the middle. How can you be direct, but also read the room? I think if I understand correctly there, you're implying, so you want to be direct, but you also don't want to be too direct, depending on what's happening. And I think that we want to be aware of our communication style and our meta communication, meaning our body language, our tone, etc. And we want to simultaneously be looking at others at the same time. So sometimes I will be really being quite direct, and I notice the other person is looking away. They are clearly showing some discomfort. And there was a time when I would just say, keep going. And now I realize, okay, maybe it's time to soften a little bit. Maybe assertive, but softer, maybe pausing, right? I think that we want to watch the people that we are communicating with. One of the hard things about being on Zoom is we don't get as full of a view, and I think we've lost some of those skills. Another thing is a lot of people keep their camera off, and it's very hard to assess anything that way. But hopefully that answered your question. Can you change your style, or is it perceived as strange? These styles are just behaviors that we learned over time. They're a matter of nature and nurture. So some of it might be, a bit about how we're hardwired. Some of it is the things that we watched. There's a whole lot of messages from culture, starting all the way from that independent and interdependent view of self. None of this is so fixed that we can't change. People might be surprised at the beginning. You might deal with that by saying to some folks in your lab, hey, I'm learning about assertiveness skills. I realize that I'm not very assertive. I'm going to try a little bit more. You might see some change. So you could do that if you're worried about it, or you could just give it a try and see how it goes. I think that all of us can change our style. All of us can grow and develop, right? We are all works in progress. Next week, or next unit, not next week, but next unit, I'm going to talk about another way of thinking about communication styles. And the take-home message will be, ideally, we want to be able to work with all of these. And we want to develop our skills. Could you touch on skill sets for assertiveness in the context of intimidation or manipulative academic relationships? I think that intimidating and manipulative academic relationships put people at serious risk, and a really important skill there is the ability to go and talk to others who can help provide some safety. And I think that takes assertiveness skills. So you're suffering, right? And you're struggling, and you feel like you don't have a right to go to the program director or the department head. So I think one assertiveness skill there is thinking through, who are the helpers here? Who are the people who are looking out for students. Sometimes it's very clear through title. Sometimes it's somebody that you've gotten to know. And so I think that it's extremely important that you consider others. The more manipulative and toxic the relationship, the more important it is to appreciate that you need support in doing this. Because communication is culturally bound, direct communication doesn't mean that we're not confident or being certain. Same for interdependent. Boundaries just look different. Please comment on this. That is absolutely true. Boundaries do look different, and assertiveness looks different. You know, we talk about how in every culture there are people who are assertive and people who are more passive. It's just that in one culture, assertiveness looks very different than in another culture. So two things. One is appreciating that of each other, not only appreciating that it exists, but appreciating it and seeing it as a strength, that we all bring our culture, and that is wonderful for the broader community. The second perspective on that is, that said, we all work together in a particular community with certain norms, and we all want to try to be aware of others, stretch to modify our behavior to accommodate others. And if we all do that, we end up coming towards a ground somewhere in the middle that works very effectively. I do think it's extremely important to acknowledge culture, and extremely important for us to say our families and cultures gave us really important views of the world and really important behaviors. And sometimes we want to soften them a little bit because there's a benefit to also behaving a little bit differently. I think it's really important that we embrace both. We are who we are, and we don't want to change substantially, right? If it feels comfortable, but we also want to say we are who we are. And if who we are isn't always helping, if the messages and cultural views we got aren't always helping, we want to stretch a little. I don't know, if that's disrespectful to culture or not. Sometimes I feel it is. Sometimes I think it is it is an important message that we all want to look in the environment we're in and adjust. So hopefully that was an answer that landed in a comfortable way. Would you recommend being direct, assertive with PIs and supervisors who are indirect? Would this person feel less comfortable if you do that? So it's interesting because some of you might be very direct with really with PIs who are much more indirect or reflective communicators. And I'm going to address this a lot in the next unit. I think that in all cases, there is an issue of us adjusting somewhat to the other person. But we can't totally adjust. So let's say you have an indirect communicator PI who doesn't ever reach out to offer advice, right? And you ask questions and you get pretty indirect, unclear guidance, and you're uncertain where to go. So if you just say, okay, that's how they are, you're not going to get a lot of direction through graduate school or through your postdoc or postbac, et cetera. On the other hand, if you say, look, I need a lot, and you, expect them to totally change, you might be disappointed. And so a clear ask. It would help if we could meet regularly and I could get some feedback. Maybe you want to send things in advance because then they have some time to think it through. And we'll go through that a little bit more in the next unit. How do you communicate when there's disparity in hierarchical views? The PI says we're all colleagues and on the same level, but students and postdocs view the PI as the boss. I think often that's the case. A lot of bosses will say we're all on the same level, but the honest truth is there's a hierarchy. So again, it's this issue of making small changes. So maybe you will never let go of the idea that there's some hierarchy, but maybe you could stretch a little and start giving a little bit more, sharing more of your opinions, or critiquing more, the material they send you. So you're never going to see zero hierarchy, but maybe you say, okay, let me put hierarchy on 0 to 100. I see it right now as an 80. Let me work to get to a 60, so that I share a little bit more, so that I feel a little bit better being assertive. Maybe you get to a 60. These numbers are arbitrary. I just think it helps to put a number. And then you say, this has improved some things. Maybe I want to get to a 40. I think the thing is that we need to view these kinds of things as small changes. We make small changes, and sometimes they add up. Right? Sometimes we make some small changes and we realize one of the small changes wasn't so helpful, so we back off. It's really not an on-off switch. It's a sort of slow change kind of approach. How to be assertive in a toxic work environment. And there's a lot more there. One person is straight about the project limitations. The PI fires back, keeps blaming the students for not working hard enough. The honest truth is that the more toxic the environment that you work in, the harder it is to have authentic conversations and to be assertive. So I think that it is critically important in those kinds of environments to get some advice, to evaluate where you're at in your training and what can be done to make sure that you get what you need out of it, but that you stay safe. And I'm going to have a lot to say about that in Unit 5. So I think getting advice is one thing. Another thing is deciding really carefully. So, right, there's task and relationship, right? Some outcomes matter more than others. So it's really important to be very clear about what you absolutely need, so that that's what you focus on. Another thing are asking who your allies are. Now, for graduate students, something that is sort of a built-in set of allies are committees and graduate directors. Sometimes postdocs don't have as much obvious ally, right? Because postdocs are much more dispersed training type experience, but maybe there's a postdoc office where you can go and talk about the environment, a faculty member that you are close to where you feel that you can share. But I think in toxic environments, a lot of this does not apply, unfortunately. Some of it does. You can still set boundaries. You can still work on whether you're catastrophizing, which is blocking you from addressing issues. So I'm not saying none of this applies, but I will be honest that there's a limit. One of the frustrations about this whole series is that so much of what we talk about requires an environment that allows growth and learning, that sees mistakes, that's looking carefully at diversity and difference, that appreciates all the different cultural lenses and other lenses we bring to the workplace. And science really needs to deal with the issue of toxic work environments. There is no way to teach somebody resilience so that they just thrive in a terrible environment. And I don't mean for the course to be that. I would, I think that's a really important point. So I think there's still things to be learned for difficult environments, but one of the key things that those of you in difficult environments need to grapple with is, what is the exact circumstance? Are there exit strategies? Are there people who can help? I often use empathic listening with my advisor, but they seem annoyed by the delay. My approach has been to ignore that. I'm wondering if there's a better approach. So one thing is, sometimes we make an assumption people are annoyed, but they're not. So you might want to ask yourself if they really seem annoyed, if they really are annoyed, and you might even want to talk to them about it. The second thing is that sometimes we have to tone down our strategy. So maybe you need to do a little bit less empathic listening for the, with this particular person. I realized I sort of process communication quickly. So the other day I was in a meeting and somebody put up a slide they said, oh, we have 2 slides before we to help with this meeting. And I had read the first slide already before they started the top. And I was like, so do I just tell them I read it all, or will I learn something by listening from them? I decided in that case that I would learn something from listening. If this was someone I talked with all the time, I would hope they might get a sense of, oh, Sharon usually moves through this kind of material quickly. So you might need to appreciate that your PI wants a little bit less of that. So maybe what you do is do less of it in the meeting, but you send an email at the end summarizing, so you feel better. But sometimes we have to change our style. There's some questions about being away and wanting to know the link. We will email everybody an invite to the fourth unit. Regarding cultural differences and adaptation, I'm not sure, related to your culture, what about neurodiversity? Thank you. I, at one point where I was talking about reading the room and looking carefully, and knowing that others are looking at you and sort of decoding your communication, I wanted to pause for a moment and acknowledge that is hard. It can be hard for many of us across cultural differences to read a room. Neurodiversity is another element that can make it much harder to decode somebody's indirect body language messages, etc. And people can make assumptions, just like they can make assumptions about men or women. They know this person's not making eye contact, they're showing disrespect, etc. I think that there's a reason why we host the small groups here and offer a group discussion for neurodiverse trainees. I think that this is complex for everyone and can be very complex when you overlay neurodiversity on it. And just like we've talked a lot about, we bring all of our strengths to the table, and we also bring who we are to the table. I guess what I hope comes out of this is an appreciation that that really we need to be focused on both. Sometimes I feel like we send a really unwelcoming message to neurodiverse trainees who bring incredible strengths to our community. And so I hope I have not sent that message. One of the reasons we have the discussion group, though, is to go into the nuance of all of that. How do you learn to be assertive when your way of communication is so different from others? 2 things: we find environments where people are curious and welcoming and want to learn about those differences, and then we talk about them. I think that all students and postdocs, fellows, all employees should put finding a supportive environment high up on their list. We put science high up on our list, and we put supportive somewhere on the list, if at all. I think it's really important to put it high up. The more differences you bring to the environment, I think the more you want to make sure that the individual that you're working for can not only appreciate difference, but values difference, sees strength in difference. So, there's a lot of top down, right, where the PI needs to learn about neurodiversity and what can I do to make my environment more welcoming. And there's some bottom up of what can I do to make sure I find that environment. The neurodiverse group discussion is a part of the general resilience series. If you email us, those are closed groups where people were signed up earlier, and we'll include a link so that some of you can join. Are there initiatives at the NIH to deal with toxic PI and trainee environments? NIH has an active anti-harassment program on campus. OITE plays a very large role in that. Any trainee at NIH who feels that they are being bullied, harassed, discriminated against can reach out to OITE, and I will help you. You can reach out directly to me. I will help you make contact, talk things through, consider the situation, make contact with NIH Civil. For those of you outside NIH at universities, if they are here in the US, NIH Extramural has a program as well. You can make a report and people in Extramural will talk to you about the environment. And they will reach out to your university and try to improve the situation. If you are worried about that or you can't find the link for Extramural, you can also email me and I will help you find it. Let me just say upfront, one thing about emailing me is sometimes you have to email twice. I get a lot of email. When I lecture, all the emails that come in while I lecture have a higher risk of getting lost, right? Because for 2 or 3 hours, I haven't checked email. So please email me again if you send me an important email. How do we get copies of the PowerPoint? If you registered, you will get emails. And we will send both the PowerPoint and the workbook. What are some ways to soften feedback for a kind but new PI who's still learning how to mentor? We're going to talk about giving feedback next week. So I will defer on that some. And if I don't answer the question enough, I think I trust that you'll put it in the chat so that we really talk about it. I will talk a lot about receiving feedback, but then at the end, I'm going to talk about giving your PI feedback. You know, remember I said there's task and relationship, right? Task is giving the feedback. Relationship is maintaining or building or improving, strengthening, maintaining the relationship I have with my PI. And so we want to we want to describe behaviors really clearly, use language that helps them see the impact because the relationship matters a lot. How do you assertively deal with a PI who gives feedback like you're not using your brain? Let me know if there is anything I can do that will help you use your brain better. So let me just pause there for a moment and say, I'm sorry that somebody receive feedback like that. I think that that is very unkind language. I think that we need to learn, we need to feel safe. And when people say things like that, it's very, very hard to feel safe. Very related to the issue of the stories that people tell us about us from the last unit. So I'm sorry that happened. So there is something about boundary setting here where a part of this is you making a decision of what is inappropriate feedback that you should not listen to and what to do about it. So the what to do about it, I think, is the hard part. That's an inappropriate way to give someone feedback. And what I would love to say is shake it off, dismiss it, and go on. But come on, this is your career. It's a hierarchical environment, so that input is insufficient. So I think it begs the question, am I in the right environment? What can I do to change it? Sometimes talking with PIs will lead to change. Sometimes it won't. And you decide that the better thing is to get out of the environment. You know, in any situation, we can do nothing, we can leave, or we can try to change it. Those are our only 3 options, which is really limiting sometimes. But also in many ways, if we use these risk-reward scaffolds, if we use these decision-making strategies, if we pay attention to our health and well-being, we can start asking good questions about, is this the right environment for me? And if the answer is no, we reach out and we try to get help to get out of it. And I think that that can be very hard. It can be easier for grad students. It can be harder for postdocs. It depends on you have a grant. International trainees have so much fear about their visas. You know, I think there are so many things that hold us back from saying, this isn't working for me and I need to explore options. So you need to try to find people that you trust and have those kinds of discussions. There are some questions about people about the groups and things, and Uli and I will try to get really, really clear guidance about the various groups. We've had some drop off, so we have room for folks, and we welcome you. To be honest, I don't think my ideas are the best part of this course. I have thought about this deeply and I hope it's helpful. And I always love hearing emails where you say it was helpful, but the real help is in talking about it. It's in practicing, it's in journaling, it's in all those other things. So join us in the groups. Uli gave her email address. Thank you for that, Uli. It's right there in the chat. If you are interested in the neurodiversity group, let her know. If you're not getting emails in general, it is possible that you registered with an email address that has a typo, because some bounce back. So we think we're reaching you and we're not. Just email Uli or I. If you can't find our email, it's just oite@nih.gov. Someone will get it to us. In the last few weeks, we have watched a hurricane devastate Puerto Rico and that region. We then watched hurricanes devastate Florida. We have watched horrific forced voting in the Ukraine and war there intensify. We have watched students, in particular women, protest in Iran with very scary images and worry for the safety of people. So take care of yourself. These are really challenging times for all of us. So thank you all, and I will see you, I hope, in 2 weeks. And I hope that the group leaders see you next week. Bye-bye.